Viewer discretion is advised, as this story has been presented without any alterations to preserve its original context.
Joy, fear, confusion, and guilt all rolled into one. Mark had taken my virginity, my cousin, the person who shouldn't have been doing this in the first place. But it had happened, and there was no going back. It all started during a family reunion at my grandparents' house when I was just 12 years old. As a Filipina, our province is pretty isolated, with only a few houses and vast stretches of land surrounding them. It was one of those rare moments where we were all together, and everyone was having a blast. My cousins were outside running around in the grass, riding horses and just soaking up the fun. One afternoon, I woke up from a nap feeling refreshed and ready to join in on the fun. But when I stepped out of my room, I noticed that only Mark and I were left inside. Everyone else had wandered off outside. My grandparents' house is pretty big, with plenty of rooms for all of us. Now, Mark was lying on one of the beds, and as I go back to lay beside him, I realized he was fast asleep. As if drawn by some invisible force, his hand started to move towards my stomach. A strange mixture of excitement and confusion washed over me when I felt his touch. It wasn't a bad feeling at all. Actually, it was oddly thrilling. I couldn't help but grab his hand and pull it back to him. But as I did, he stirred in his sleep, sensing my movements. He opened his eyes, looking a bit startled for a moment. For a brief second, I thought we were both caught off guard. But then he just turned away from me and continued sleeping as if nothing had happened. So, while lying beside him, Mark asked, "Hey Jane, why did you grab my hand?" I replied with, "Oh, I thought you were asleep." He then responded, "Are you planning something? Why did you do it?" His words and the way he looked at me sent shivers down my spine. It was like he could see right through me, and for a moment I felt completely exposed. Even though I knew in my heart that I hadn't done anything wrong, his question made me feel guilty somehow. He just leaned in and kissed me on the lips, but I pushed him away instinctively. We didn't speak after that awkward encounter. He simply said, "I'm sorry," and left the room. This was my first kiss. And to be honest, it was an experience unlike any other. Despite knowing we shouldn't have done it, there was this intense attraction between us. It felt both thrilling and wrong at the same time. A strange mix of excitement and guilt that I couldn't ignore. Even though we were avoiding each other now, my thoughts kept drifting back to him. The entire reunion passed in a blur, and every time our eyes met, accidentally, we would look away as if embarrassed by what had happened between us. But beneath it all, he was constantly on my mind. I couldn't shake off the memory of his kiss or the strange mix of emotions that came with it. It was weird, but I felt this intense connection to him despite knowing we were cousins. The more I tried to suppress these feelings, the stronger they became. It was a confusing time, filled with both guilt and excitement, and I knew things would never be the same between us again. Life went on as normal for a while, after that awkward reunion. Then one day, everything changed. Mark's family decided to move in with us. See, we were both starting high school, and it was conveniently located near my house. Since I was an only child, there was plenty of space for them to stay until they could build another room for him. Our house had two rooms, one for me and one for my parents. Naturally, Mark would be staying with me temporarily, They tried to convince me that he'd sleep on the floor while I sit in bed. It sounded a bit strange at first, but I went along with it. I have to admit, I was a little nervous about having him sleep in the same room as me. But Mark didn't seem to have any bad intentions. He just wanted to catch up and talk like we were normal cousins again. And that night, he did exactly that, sleeping peacefully on the floor without even attempting anything inappropriate. It made me feel safe and trust him completely. The following day, things took another interesting turn. As I was walking to my room with a chocolate drink in hand, I accidentally tripped and spilled it all over Mark. Luckily, it wasn't hot enough to burn him, but he jumped up startled because his blanket and everything was soaked through. "Oh no!" I exclaimed, mortified. "I'm so sorry." He just smiled and said, "It's okay. Don't worry about it." Then, without a second thought, he took off his shirt to change into something dry. For some reason, that made me feel even more uncomfortable, but also weirdly curious at the same time. Maybe he was just so used to being around other guys that he didn't even think twice about changing in front of me. I quickly tried to brush off those thoughts and act normal. After all, it was my fault for spilling the drink on him. And since I already trusted him, I blurted out, "You can sleep beside me on my bed if you want. It's a big one." He agreed without hesitation, laying down as usual without any signs of impropriety. His calmness only solidified my trust in him even more. The next morning came around way too fast, and I woke up at 4, and to see Mark lying peacefully beside me. But something caught my eye. His penis was standing tall. It felt weird, seeing it like that while he was sleeping, but I couldn't help but keep looking. He had changed into some sexy boxers, since his pants were wet from the spilled chocolate drink last night. I know it sounds strange, but right then and there, I think I started to fantasize about him. It was so bizarre. His innocent slumber contrasted sharply with that image of arousal, and something in me clicked. I liked him. Sunday was coming up, and for some reason, the idea of going to church felt appealing at that moment. As I got dressed, I removed my bra and turned to look at Mark again, making sure he was still sleeping. To my shock, his eyes were wide open, staring right back at me. My heart skipped a beat. I never would have guessed he was awake. Honestly, it's one of those moments I'll never forget. That smile on his face as we locked eyes sent a chill down my spine. He stood up and said, "I'll go outside so you can dress." But I quickly convinced him to stay put by saying I didn't want to disturb his sleep. I could easily get dressed with a little cover-up. Then, out of the blue, he asked if he could kiss me again. I didn't respond right away, but before I knew it, his lips were on mine once more. This time, though, there was no resistance from me. In fact, I found myself enjoying every second of it. We kissed with such passion and intensity, like two lovers lost in their own world. But then fear struck me. What if someone heard us? I pushed him away, afraid that our door wasn't locked, giving anyone a chance to walk in on us. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at the same time. In those few moments, we had crossed some invisible line, and there was no turning back. The memory of that kiss still sends shivers down my spine whenever I think about it. "I'm sorry," Mark mumbled after I pushed him away. But in reality, the fear of getting caught had been the driving force behind my actions. "I'm scared that our parents will find out about this," I blurted out, hoping he wouldn't question my motives too much. Mark's response was both calming and surprising. He locked the door and said nonchalantly, "They'll never know now." It was like he could read my mind. He knew exactly what I needed to feel safe and secure in that moment. He then went back to kissing me passionately, his hands roaming down my body until they reached my breast. I couldn't help but take this opportunity to touch the very thing that had captivated my thoughts earlier. As I massaged his erection through his boxers, a strange mix of excitement and fear washed over me. It was thrilling to finally be able to act on those fantasies, yet terrifying at the same time. What if someone walked in? His penis wasn't particularly large, maybe around 5 inches or so, but that didn't matter. All I could feel was the pure exhilaration of touching him for the first time, and the adrenaline rush of knowing we were doing something forbidden. Mark held my hand and guided it inside his boxers, allowing me to explore every inch of his arousal. As I held his penis in my grasp, a wave of sensations overwhelmed me. The texture of his skin, the way he twitched with every touch, the warmth radiating from him. It was all so incredibly intimate and exciting. It felt like an electric current was running between us, connecting our bodies on some primal level. I never imagined that something so simple could feel so powerful and electrifying. But then, just as suddenly as it had begun, I pulled away. I don't want to have sex yet, I declared, my voice trembling slightly from the intensity of everything we had just shared. To my relief, he respected my decision without a second thought. He gave my breast one last lingering kiss and said, "I really love your body, but we should stop it here." I wholeheartedly agreed. That encounter was more than enough to leave me both exhilarated and terrified. Because of his respect, my feelings for Mark deepened even more. He had shown me that despite our forbidden desires, he still cared about me enough to hold back. That kind of consideration was incredibly appealing. It made me like him even more than before. We quickly dressed and stopped the intimate exchange as if nothing had happened. As we lay down to sleep again, I noticed Mark holding my hand gently, just like a loving couple would do. It felt so natural, so comfortable. The shyness that once consumed me was gone, replaced by a deep sense of trust and affection. He asked me if I enjoyed the feeling of his lips on my nipple, and I couldn't help but admit that I did. We continued to talk about our feelings for each other, confessing desires and fears, until we decided to try again. This time, though, we agreed not to go all the way, mainly because I was still a virgin and didn't want to risk getting pregnant. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, we removed our clothes once more and started exploring each other's bodies with renewed intensity. The experience of sucking on each other, tracing every curve and line, sent shivers down my spine. It was simply exhilarating. That memory remains vivid in my mind to this day. The desire for a full-blown sexual encounter kept nagging at me, but we couldn't bring ourselves to cross that line just yet. Still, we found another way to satisfy our urges without actually having intercourse. We discovered the 69 position, which quickly became our favorite. And it was also my very first time sucking on a penis. It felt so right, so natural, like we were meant to do this together. As I delved into this newfound experience, I reveled in every sensation, sucking on Mark's penis with an intensity born from curiosity and excitement. It was a first for both of us, and I was determined to make it memorable. My mouth worked tirelessly, swallowing whatever came my way without hesitation. Mark finally pushed me away gently, saying that he had ejaculated. At the time, I didn't quite understand what he meant. I was still so new to all this. But his words made me stop. And although a part of me wanted to continue, I respected his decision not to push things further. In reality, I yearned for him to return the favor and suckle my nipple as well. But I didn't know how to express that desire without making things awkward. So we ended our session there, both with a mix of satisfaction and longing in our hearts. From that day forward, Mark and I became inseparable, indulging in nightly rendezvous filled with passion and exploration. Our go-to move was the 69 position. It felt so perfect for us. Sometimes, when our parents were away at work, we'd even sneak off to the living room, turning our home into a playground of secret pleasure. It was exhilarating to be able to indulge in such intimacy without fear or judgment, especially since no one suspected anything from two innocent cousins. For about 2 glorious weeks, life was blissfully carefree and filled with excitement. But then tragedy struck. Mark's father passed away in an accident. The news devastated him. He cried inconsolably for days on end. To make matters worse, his mother could no longer afford to keep him in the same private school as me, so he had to return to their hometown. The day his father died was also the last time we engaged in any of our secret activities. Mark didn't initiate or even hint at wanting to continue our nightly rituals anymore. It was like a switch had been flipped, and everything changed. We simply coexisted as cousins again, pretending that nothing ever happened between us. But then came his final night before leaving. As we lay in bed, he asked me one last time if we could have sex together. Initially, I refused, clinging to the idea that it was too soon for such a drastic step. But seeing him lonely, silent, unresponsive, it just didn't sit right with me. It was the complete opposite of the passionate person I knew him to be, and I couldn't stand watching him suffer like this. So, in a moment of impulsiveness, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I locked the door behind me, stripped down to nothing, and climbed onto his bed, sitting right on top of him. His face was a mixture of confusion and bewilderment as he looked up at me, but I just smiled and said, "Let's do it." He didn't resist. Instead, he kissed every inch of my body with an intensity that made it feel like our last time together. The passion in his touch, the desperation in his eyes, it all seemed to melt away any remaining doubts or hesitations I had. It felt like a final farewell, a way for us to savor the memories we'd shared and create one more unforgettable moment before reality set in. As his kisses traveled down my body, I found myself growing increasingly aroused. The thought of losing my virginity to him crossed my mind, an idea that both thrilled and terrified me at the same time. But something about the situation made it feel right, like a natural progression of our intimate journey together. And so we did it. Tears streamed down my face as I experienced pain mixed with pleasure. Feeling blood seep out as he took my innocence away. It was an overwhelming mix of emotions. Joy, fear, confusion, and guilt all rolled into one. Mark had taken my virginity, my cousin, the person who shouldn't have been doing this in the first place. But it had happened, and there was no going back. We lay together, exhausted, but content, until morning arrived. He then packed his things and prepared to leave for good. As I watched him go, a strange emptiness filled me. It felt like heartbreak. My virginity lost to someone I could never truly have in life. Tears streamed down my face as he disappeared from view, the pain of losing him becoming unbearable. I spent the rest of the day curled up in bed, unable to stop crying. My eyes were swollen and red, a testament to the anguish I felt inside. The guilt gnawed at me, making it impossible to even leave the room. Fearing my parents would see my broken state,